Hi, I'm Rashonda. I'm the creator of this channel, as well as the artbyro.com website, where you can find over 200 art and drawing tutorials. So what this channel is all about is trying to encourage beginner artists or self-taught artists, hobby artists, to just have some fun, experiment, and enjoy the process of creating art and not worry so much about the outcome itself. Let's have some fun. And today we're going to be drawing cat eyes, and I love drawing eyes, especially cat eyes. They're so much fun, and they're not as hard as you might think that they are. So today we're going to be using markers, but you can use whatever you want to color your cat eyes. And I am doing mine on artist trading cards, and if you're not familiar with what those are, grab the free download in the description and you can learn more about them. So let's go ahead on over to the art studio and get started making some super fun cat eyes. Today we are going to be drawing a cat eye. And again, I'm using an artist trading cards, which if you've seen any of my other videos, I tend to do this more than anything else, mostly because I like that I can put them in a binder and keep a little portfolio, and because they're smaller, it saves me some time, and I have some nice little artwork that I can collect. I can trade them in the future if I want. I can keep them in a portfolio. So that's what you're seeing here. This is an artist trading card. I make these myself. I cut them out of a bigger piece of cardstock, and then I just have a pile of them sitting there. Whenever I want to draw something, I just grab one and I'm ready to go. So let's go ahead and get started with the cat eye. Now you might want to bring up some reference photos so you can look at the different colors, the sizes, the shapes, the way they're angled. There's a lot of different variation with the different cat eyes depending on the individual cat itself. So what we're going to do is start by laying out some basic guidelines, and then we'll evolve that into a little bit more detail. So I want the eyeball to be fairly close to the center. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered. And I want it to take up, I want the eye itself to take up most of this card. I want to fill the whole card up with my cat eye. So I need to keep those things in mind when I'm making my shapes and my guidelines here. So because we're drawing an eyeball, we know that that's a circle. And some of this is going to get covered up, but it's good to draw it outright at the shape that it is, just because it helps to keep everything even, and then we can cover it up as we need to. So now we're gonna start working on, I guess they would be the lids. And I'm drawing this one on a bit of an angle, and you can draw a straight line that's angled if you want to help, if that's helpful. Do whatever you need to do to get things going in the direction that you want them to go. And now we're going to draw the bottom. And this is going to come down. And then we're going to make these wider. We just want to get some basic lines going on here so we know where everything's going to be and what it's going to look like. And I like these little click erasers for these. They work really nice. They're smaller. You can get in there and not mess up on the areas you want to leave there, and you can get in there and get what you need to erase. Okay, so now we have the basic shapes of our cat eye. And then we can go ahead and draw the pupil in there. That will make it look more like a cat eye. And cat eyes, cats don't have round pupils. They have more of these diamond shape pupils. Okay. So there's the pupil. That's mostly going to be black. We could add a couple highlights in here. And then this would be the colored part of the cat eye. So now what we want to do is start adding a little bit more detail to it. And there's not a ton of detail with the cat eyes. This is going to be black. And then there's this thickness around the edge. We want to draw that in there. And that will also be black. And then also at the top, and that's going to cover up some of the eyeball. So after the eyeball begins, it's round, but as we start adding stuff and putting the thickness of the lid, it's going to be less rounded in appearance, because that is covered up. The eyeball itself is behind these eyelids. So those will be black. These lines we're going to erase. And again, you can bring up reference photos to do this. It's usually easier if you have something you can look at. I'm really just showing you my process for how I work and how I do things. And we want to keep these fairly rounded and even. So you might have to keep working back and forth on it a little bit. So I think that's pretty much it for that part of it. Now you can decide how much detail you want to put with the fur. If you want to add some extra detail around the sides, if it's, you know, a cat that has like a tiger stripe pattern, maybe you want to put some of those in here. You could add those fur patterns. That's up to you on how detailed. Usually when I draw the eyes, I tend to focus more on the eye itself, the eyeball area, and put most of my detail there. But that's up to you on how you want to do that. So now we need to add some black to this so we can get ready to start adding in some color. So I like using these black Sharpie pens. I use these for a lot of my artwork. So for this, and I'm going to use this for the outline, and since there's a little bit of area in there that needs to be filled in, it might be easier to use a marker, a little bit thicker marker instead of the thinner pen. This doesn't look too bad though, so I might go ahead and just use this. And then rotate your card or your paper as you're going over your lines to make it easier. You don't want to be trying to do your outline on if you're at an awkward angle. And then we can add some little strokes of fur if we want. Now I'm just going to fill this in. And then we can work on adding some color to the eyeball itself. And then after that, all we need to do is figure out how much detail we want around the eyeball itself. And I probably could have made this bigger so it took up a little bit more room. This is a medium tip, which is fairly wide. You could use a thinner marker, which would be good for adding some details of the fur. You can see down here, the lines are a little wider than probably what you want for the fur detail. So now I want to leave some highlights on the pupil. So when I fill this in, and you can go back in with like a white jelly roll or a paint pen or something. I think it's easier to just leave that and not fill it in. And then when you do your color, you just go around the other side of the highlighted area. So there's the outline for the eyeball. And now we can go in and start adding in some details around the edges where the fur is and make some fur texture in there so that we can tell that this is a cat. I'm just going to do kind of the same thing I did down there, because these are black, but they are fur. So I'm not going to make the edges really straight and solid. I'm going to keep in mind that it is fur. And I want to fill it in. I want it to be black, but I don't want to outline those edges of that shape to avoid having that really smooth line around the edge of it. And I'm going to do that for any areas where I'm going to put these black stripes in. And if you like drawing animals, or if you want to learn how to draw animals, doing a section like this, doing the eyes, I love drawing eyes. I've always loved eyes on all the different animals, people. It's always been one of those things that I've been interested in. But by doing something like this, instead of trying to draw the entire cat or to draw the entire face of the cat, this makes it a lot easier. There's less pressure for everything to be perfect and having so many different areas that you have to focus on. It allows you to just work on one skill set at a time instead of trying to do the full thing and having all of that to worry about. So we're getting some experience working on the eyeball and making a shiny texture. We're also getting experience doing the fur texture. So this is good practice for developing your skills without having all that extra pressure of making everything look right. Does it look like a cat? Did everything come out even? I think this is a really good practice exercise to do these. And like I said, I think eyes are just so interesting and fun to do. I think they're a really good subject matter to work on as a whole. And like I said, don't feel like by just focusing on the eye or a small section that you're losing out on anything, because it does allow you to try some different things and practice different skills and techniques, which is going to be beneficial to you in the long run. And you're probably more likely to finish something like this than a full detailed picture of an entire cat, or even if it's just the head of the cat. it's a lot more involved than just working on this little bit of the eye and the fur. So what I'm doing now is just adding in some darker fur textures. I'm working on just the black at the moment, and where I need to use the black to add some different fur and to give it some texture. And then I can go in with some browns and grays or whatever other colors I want to put in here. Just breaking up some of this area. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this, like with everything. There's different ways you could do the fur. I'll put some fur up here. Just adding in some different details. Making sure it looks like fur. We want to get that fur texture in here. So I think that's probably about all I want to do with the black. I don't want to overdo it. So the next thing that I want to do is take my eraser, and I want to clean up these pencil lines before I start adding my color in there. So we don't want to put our markers over top of the pencil lines. So the next thing would be to get some markers, figure out what colors we want to make everything, and start adding color. I'm ready to add some color to the cat eye drawing now. So what I did was I collected some markers that are going to work for the colors that I want to use. I have several different markers, different browns, kind of orangish colors. And what I do is I take a little scrap piece of paper. These are left over from when I cut out my artist trading cards. And I just do a little sample of those colors on that paper. So I'm going to start with the fur, and then we'll go back and figure out what color to do the eyeball itself. So the way I work with my markers, and of course, like with anything, there's different ways that you can do this. I lay down my lightest color first, and then I'll go over it with my darker color and then blend those markers together. So I want this brown to have, excuse me, I want the brown to have a little bit of an orange tint to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and put some orange down. And then I'm going to take this brown marker and I'm going to put the brown in where it needs to go. And I have a reference photo of a cat that I'm using as my reference for my colors. It's always good to have a reference, especially if you're working on something that's from life, a real life, not a fantasy type, which even in that case, it's good to have reference images. So what I do is I just go back and forth with the colors until I have the look that I want. As you layer these colors up, they'll get darker, so I can put the brown back on top of this and it will be darker than the first layer of the brown. And as you blend them, and you can use a colorless blender, I just use whatever the lighter color is. It will lighten your markers up a little bit as the alcohol gets in there and saturates the paper a little bit. It's going to lighten that up. But you can just go back over it, and you have to just kind of find that balance between
that how light and dark you want it and how much the alcohol is saturating the paper. You have to find kind of a happy medium of where you can stop and have the look that you're going for. So I'm just gonna do those edges, blend that. So you have to work while the markers are still wet if you want them to blend. Once the alcohol evaporates, your colors aren't going to blend anymore. So a workaround for that is to just do small sections at a time. So for example, if I know I want to use this marker for the entire area of the fur, if I do the whole area and then come back and start doing the details down here, this area is going to evaporate before I can get back up to it. So you want to work on different sections at a time and then go back, work your way around so you have that unevaporated alcohol working in your favor. If you want to blend your colors, if you don't want to blend them, if you're not worried about blending your colors together, then that really doesn't matter. But then you're going to be left with sharper edges where your different colors are at. So I'm going to do the same thing I did there. I'm just going to start putting in, trying to make a little bit of fur texture with these big markers and following the pattern for the color of the fur where the colors change. And again, just going back and forth with the colors and blending them in a little bit. For this type of drawing, they're not going to be as blended, but I do want to soften those edges so the colors don't have such a harsh edge to them. And what I'm doing is this fur's gonna transition and go darker and darker as it goes towards this corner over here. So I'm just kind of making a little bit of a fur texture. And then I also have, I'll show you so you see where I'm kind of going with this. I have these brown outliner pens. I have this one's a lighter one, this is a darker one. So I'm going to go back in and make those individual fur textures with the brown after I get these colors laid down, kind of like how I did with the black. And obviously this isn't going to be a super detailed, realistic cat eye drawing. This is more, a little bit more stylized, just something fun that works. In my opinion, it works well for the artist trading cards. This is something, like I mentioned earlier, I can put it in my portfolio and just hang on to it if I want, so I can go back and reference it later. And then usually what I do is at some point I decide I want to go ahead and trade it off, and I'll put it in the artist trading card group as available for trade. And then I will trade it for somebody else's artwork. If you've never done that before, it's a lot of fun. It's a little bit of a time commitment, but it's a lot of fun to do that and make those trades with people. So now I'm just working my way around. Again, working in small sections so that I can blend my colors in. This is how I like to work with markers. I'm sure there's a lot of different ways. I usually put this lighter color down first, even though I know I'm going to be adding darker colors over top of it. I'll still layer that all the way in to the edge, which to some extent feels kind of wasteful when I know I'm going to be covering it up anyway. But layering it changes the way that they look, the way that your colors look. So if you just put this marker down without the other one underneath it, it's going to change how the color looks. But I like that it gives me options for how I want to cover with the next color. It gives you a little bit more control over what you end up doing. You can change your mind a little bit as you go and make decisions on the fly instead of trying to figure it out ahead of time. If I just do the darker color first, then I'm locked into that. I'm committed to that color being there. Where if you put the lighter color down and work over top of it, you can make changes as you go. So I'm just doing the same thing I did before that I did down here. As I get to this edge, the colors are going to go darker and darker. I could probably even go another step darker with this and I could find a brown that's closer to a black and make this edge even darker. But I don't think I'm going to do that. So I'm going to finish up the rest of this in a time lapse, so you're not just watching me doing the same thing over and over again. So I will be back with you after I get the rest of this fur done. Okay, so I have the color for the fur all done. So that's kind of a base for the colors. And like I mentioned before, I have these pens that I can add some more texture to that. Now it's up to you how much you would want to work on this. You can keep working on it. Markers are probably not the easiest medium to use if you want to get really detailed. Something like colored pencils would probably be easier. But for the style of drawing that I'm doing today for this artist trading card, this works. This is fine. I don't need it to be super detailed. So now comes the fun part, working on the eyeball. And again, I have my little test piece of paper, I have my markers, and my pen to do some line detail inside the eyeball. And one thing that comes up that I get asked quite often is if you can mix the different brands of markers, and yes, you can. I have, these are Sharpies, I have some big markers. These browns that I was using was Prismacolor. I have these touch markers that I really like. And the reason I have so many different brands of marker is because over the years, I've experimented with different brands, tried some different brands out. It's really just a personal preference for what you like to use. Of course, price comes into it, what you can afford. You don't want to use really cheap markers, but depending on what you're doing, you also don't necessarily need to have the most expensive markers either. So I know a lot of people really like the Copic markers, and I do have some of these. I don't love them. They're very expensive compared to some of the other brands that you can get. And for what I do, I consider myself a hobby artist because I'm doing this for my own enjoyment. I'm not working as an artist. I'm not selling my pieces. I haven't even entered any art shows in quite some time. I create art because it relaxes me. I enjoy it. I do like doing the artist trading cards from time to time, but that still keeps me in the category of a hobby artist. So if you're a hobby artist like I am, then there's really no benefit that, in my mind, there's no benefit to spending a bunch of money on art supplies unless money's really not an issue for you. If you have the extra money and you don't mind paying extra for your art supplies, that's fine. But I think for most of us, we're on somewhat of a limited budget. So what I'm doing is using my reference to choose some colors. Now, another thing that markers sometimes are not the easiest medium to use is that you have to have the right colors to blend them together to get the look you're going for, which means you have to have a lot of different markers. And if you don't have the exact color you're looking for, then you have to just compromise and make do with what you do have. So I'm just putting down some colors here. This particular cat eye that I'm using as a reference has a lot of different browns and orange, yellows. So I'm just doing the best I can to recreate all of those colors that are blended in there together while being a little bit limited to what I have to choose from. So I'm just gonna finish that up. So now the last thing I want to do with the eyeball is to go in with some white, add some highlights. I want to add some lines in here. I have this green that I think will work good, so I'm going to add some lines in here to give it some detail. But before I can do that, I need to let this area dry. And you can feel it. It'll feel kind of cold when you touch it. But if I try to go over it now, it's going to absorb into the paper. So I have for my white, I like to use these Jelly Roll pens. But if I go over it with white right now, it's just going to absorb into the dampness of the paper. So that needs to dry a little bit. I can go into this area now, and I can show you what my plan was for that. So I have my base color down, but I do want to add in some detail of the fur texture with the browns. And as I mentioned before, it's up to you how much detail you want to put in here. I mean, you could spend hours on this and put a ton of detail and a ton of texture for the fur in here. But you just have to decide for yourself how much detail you want. And you don't have to put any. You really wouldn't even have to add any of these textures in here. You could just leave it the way that it is. And sometimes I do that, and sometimes I feel like adding a bit more detail to it. So it just depends on what your choices are for that day or for that particular piece of art. And you'll have to determine what that stopping point is going to be for you, for your drawings. Because you could work this thing for hours and just put a ton of detail in it. And that's not what I want to do here. I just want to add a little bit. Usually when I work on my drawings, I don't like to have these big solid blocks of color. And even though there's different coloring in there, which helps break it up a little bit, I like to have these extra details in here just to avoid having those big solid blocks of color in there. And that's just my personal preference. You should definitely do whatever seems right for you. You might not want to put any of this detail in there at all, and that's fine. So maybe just a few more in here. And then we can do some whiskers if we want. You could add maybe some whiskers that look like they're coming down from the nose. You could have, sometimes cats have those random whiskers up here above their eyes, depending on the cat. We could put those, and again, that can be done with the white jelly roll pen. So I think I'm about done with the fur. I don't want to overwork it too much. At some point, if you start putting too much texture in, too much of the fur, then you get to a point where you have to keep going with it and end up with the whole thing having all the fur texture in it, and I don't want to do that with this drawing. So I think I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I think that's good for the fur. Let me move that so you can see it a little bit better. And then I'm just going to wait for that eyeball area to dry a little bit more, and then I'll be back to finish it up. I've let the marker dry out, let the alcohol evaporate. So the only thing left to do is just to add in the little final details. And this step is optional. You really don't have to do this, but it does add another level of detail to the drawing. So I have a green Sharpie pen, and I'm just going to add a few lines in here just to break this up a little bit, give it a little bit more detail. And like with the rest of it, you can add as many or as few lines in here that you see fit. Just do whatever looks right for you. I don't want to get too carried away with it. You could also add in some dots in here. If you look at the texture that's inside the eyeball itself, it's kind of a combination of specks of color and some line. So you can put a combination of the two in there. And then the next thing would be to add the highlights. And you can do this with different shapes. You can do it with dots or, like circles. It's up to you again. Do what you think looks right. You can add some little reflections over off to the side. this area of the eyeball is usually has some moisture to it, so you'll see some reflections there. And you could also use like a Posca paint pen or something like that. I prefer using the Jelly Roll. It's what I'm comfortable using, it's what I'm used to, but there are other options for adding the white. Then put just a couple little whiskers up there. You could do some whiskers here if you wanted. You could add some little areas of white in the fur, some lighter spots of fur if you wanted. There's a lot of different things you can do. You could do some more dots of color, of white rather. Or you could do color as well if you wanted. But I think I'm going to call this done. I don't want to overwork it. It is possible to overwork your drawings. See if I can zoom in without shaking the camera too much. So that's it for this cat eye drawing. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Happy creating!
Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I also hope that you followed along and tried drawing your own cat eye. If you liked the video, please leave us a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to get notified of more videos to come in the future. And don't forget to check out the description box. There's some freebies in there and additional information. And I will see you the next video. Bye!